But we can talk a little bit more about what you're seeing on your screen with Whiton, a former State Department senior advisor and author of Smart Power, Between Diplomacy and War. He's with us now. Christian, good to see you. I would have asked Ed Henry this question, but I can certainly start with you on this new video. It's from a U.S. government official. What should Americans know about the timing of the release of this?
Well, it's a shocking video, and it's, of course, you know, it's whose heartstrings aren't tugged at by watching things like that. But it's been released by the administration on a political schedule. They realize they're in pretty bad shape, especially in the House of Representatives, in seeking authority to bomb Syria. This is intended to sway votes, primarily through emotion rather than through hard-headed calculus of national interests. And so that's what the administration is trying to do in leaking this.
You know, I've heard some people say it, politics of optics. Is that what this is?
I think so. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you can talk about 100,000 people who have been killed throughout the Syria war, and that's a lot of people, but it's sort of, you know, it's very hard for the average person to wrap their head around that. But when you can see someone suffering, especially a child suffering from chemical weapons, you know, who wouldn't be moved by that? But then again, of course, the job of our congressmen are to ask hard questions and hard judgments, and whether it's really in the U.S. national interest to respond to this with military force.
You know, I don't know how widely this is reported, but I think our viewers should know this, Christian. This is not new video. Some of this stuff can be found on YouTube. This was a video that was edited together with some of the worst of what people were suffering, and it certainly is hard to look at, for that Senate Intelligence Committee. And now it's been given to the media by this U.S. government official. I want to point to the numbers where people who were being polled most recently by the Washington Post and ABC News to show you where Americans say they stand on this in this poll. 59% oppose a strike on Syria. 36% support it. Are these the kinds of images that you think can sway public opinion?
I don't think they will. Frankly, the American people have been through so much since September 11th, 2001, seeing journalists beheaded, seeing you know, thousands and thousands of Americans killed, thousands of others killed. We really have been so much. You know, those who studied chemical weapons usage realize this, in fact, is not the first time this has happened in a century, as the administration would have you believe. Chemical weapons were used in the Iran-Iraq war. So I think the reason you'll continue to see the American people opposed to this is they are just sort of looking and saying, yes, that's terrible. But, you know, what happened in Rwanda was terrible. What happened in Sudan was terrible. What happened in Cambodia, all three of those instances of genocide were terrible. But our military is not a Peace Corps with guns. We have to make very hard decisions on where we get involved, and that's why the American people continue to oppose this.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. We're not a Peace Corps with guns. And I want to talk with you a little bit about our image around the world. I mean, when you were a senior advisor at the State Department, part of your job, I would imagine, would have been the messaging of securing our reputation around the world. So is it a case of us just looking bad in other people's eyes if we don't take the step, or what?
I don't think so, because frankly, if we take this step, and you know, the word is it's changing a little bit in its nature as it's being presented to Congress, but it looks so far like a desultory one-off attack with standoff weapons, cruise missiles. And we've also said it's definitively not about regime change. That's what the White House has said, even though they have separately called for Assad to go. So what may happen is you have, I mean, if this gets authorized and happened, we lob a bunch of cruise missiles. Assad survives because we've already said he's not going to be targeted, and we've also given him what will have been weeks of warning, and it makes the U.S. look weak. And you know, it's nice to be loved, but frankly, it's better to be respected around the world. And this administration really predicated its whole foreign policy on getting more friends abroad, getting more friends in Europe, going to Egypt, basically changing the tone from what it was during the Iraq War, apologizing for things the United States did as far back as the 1950s. And none of that seems to have worked. And I'm afraid that if we just lob some cruise missiles and declare it good enough for government work, that our image will be even worse.
You know, I want to tick off some countries. We got a list a little while ago of all of the countries' representatives whom Secretary of State John Kerry has called on the phone in the last 24 hours. Egypt, Mexico, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the Arab League, and the president of the Syrian opposition. What do we expect these people to do?
Well, it would be nice if they would at least come out publicly and say we are with the United States and stand against not only Assad but also the Islamists
well, Russia's not going to do
among
that.
The rebels. Of course not. They're not going to do that. And we have no coalition. We have no allies with us. And our most important ally customarily when it comes to the use of military force is Great Britain. They're the ones who are most often with us. And they had a very remarkable vote in their parliament where their prime minister got shut down, said, no, you're not going to be participating in this because there's not a real strategy there. John Kerry made a lot of hay back in 2004 criticizing George W. Bush, the coalition of the willing he put together for Iraq. That included 40 countries. It didn't include the UN Security Council, but included 40 countries. John Kerry has one country, France, and so far it doesn't even look like France is going to commit any military force to this.
I wanted to ask you about that. What happened to France today? Because now they've decided to wait for the United Nations report.
Well, I think, any democracy is going to, at some point or another, have to reconcile its actions with the wishes of its constituents. I mean, you saw what happened, and it really is a major turning point, I think, in this debate that Congress was in recess when it got asked to do this, because people got to hear. And I think, probably the French president, French premier is hearing from people who really don't want to do this. I imagine the average Frenchman, like the average American, are willing to defer a great deal to the commander-in-chief if he comes and says, our nation is threatened and this is what we need to do to defend it. But we haven't had that yet. The president is set to speak to the American people this week. But, judging from the past 5 years of performance on foreign affairs, we're not going to hear anything terribly compelling. And, it's not just the president. It's also John McCain and Lindsey Graham. No one in Washington is articulating a clear foreign policy toward the Middle East, it doesn't seem.
Well, with Senators Graham and McCain outside the White House just a few days ago, we got to hear at least their vision of where the president has gone wrong and their vision of what they would do going forward. So some of the top Republicans have at least said what they would do. How big is the job on Tuesday night for the president? Is it too late for him to try to convince the public that his way is the right way ahead attacking Syria?
I think so, unless there's some dramatic change. But again, just saying that there's an international standard that's been violated and that we need to go in. Basically, that someone has used chemical weapons and we're going to punish them so that others don't use that. I don't think people are going to see that as a strong enough rationale to go to war, especially given the risk. It doesn't seem like Obama, or McCain for that matter, has really calculated who this is going to help. And the most important thing isn't what happens the next couple weeks. The most important thing is who runs Syria after the war and who controls the chemical weapons after the war. And we don't know if a bombing helps. It probably doesn't help Assad, although we don't know, because if he survives, he looks resilient. But it could help al-Qaeda's affiliate. It could help the Muslim Brotherhood. We just don't know, and it doesn't seem like anyone in Washington has gamed this out sufficiently. Real
quickly before I let you go, some scenarios about payback are being looked at right now. If we attack Syria, our border, or their border rather, from Beirut, which is where we have a U.S. embassy, is only 45 miles away. They could likely, possibly, either them or an ally get a plane off, drop a bomb on it, attack it some kind of way. If we hit them back, are we at war?
I mean, by definition, we would be. I don't know if that would be recognized. We've basically been in a state of conflict with Iran since 1979, and Washington just hasn't realized it. I'll bet, yes, they would try and hit back because, unlike the Israelis, we've basically said we're just going to do this and walk away. And so, we're not maintaining escalatory dominance in this conflict. Iran knows it, and they may try and hit us.
Christian Whiton, thank you very much. We appreciate your experience formerly with the